The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital in rural Pine Ridge, Montana, was never supposed to be a war zone. But on a cold Thursday evening in late October, that's exactly what it became. Nurse Rebecca Hayes moved through the ER with the same calm efficiency she always did. White sneakers squeaking softly on linoleum, ponytail swinging, clipboard in hand. To everyone around her, she was just another caregiver. Soft-spoken, kind, maybe a little too quiet. No one knew the truth. Rebecca was 34 years old, average height, with dark brown hair and hazel eyes that never seemed to hold a person's gaze for too long. She smiled when she needed to, nodded politely, kept her head down. In a small town like Pine Ridge, that was enough to blend in, enough to be invisible, and that's exactly what she wanted. She had been working at St. Mary's for almost 2 years now. The staff liked her well enough. She was reliable, never called in sick, never caused drama. But she wasn't one of them, not really. She didn't go to the Friday night gatherings at Murphy's bar, didn't share stories about her past, didn't talk much about anything actually. Rebecca's sweet, one of the older nurses had said once, but she's a little, I don't know, fragile maybe? Fragile. That word followed her everywhere. It hung in the air when Dr. Ken Archer, the ER's head physician, spoke to her like she was a child. It echoed in the break room when the younger nurses swapped stories about their boyfriends and workout routines, while Rebecca sat alone with her thermos of black coffee. It whispered through the hospital halls whenever someone made a comment about how quiet she was, how delicate, how she probably wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real crisis. They had no idea Rebecca had seen more real crises than all of them combined. But she never said a word. That Thursday started like any other. Farmer came in with a gashed hand from a table saw, a teenager with a sprained ankle from basketball practice, an elderly woman with chest pains that turned out to be heartburn. Standard small-town emergencies. Nothing Rebecca couldn't handle. She was restocking gauze in exam room 3 when she heard the commotion near the ambulance. Bay voices, loud ones. She stepped into the hallway and saw 2 EMTs rushing in with a gurney. On it was a young man, maybe 19 or 20. His face pale, his shirt soaked in blood. Gunshot wound to the abdomen. One of the EMTs shouted, "Vitals dropping fast." Dr. Archer appeared instantly, barking orders. Nurses swarmed. Rebecca moved toward the chaos, her instincts kicking in before her mind could catch up. "Rebecca, step back," Dr. Archer said sharply, not even looking at her. "We need experienced hands on this one." She froze. Experienced hands, as if she hadn't spent 6 years in the army, as if she hadn't done 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, as if she hadn't worked in field hospitals where the blood never stopped and the screams never ended, but she said, "Nothing." She stepped back. She watched as they wheeled the young man into Trauma 1, watched as the doors swung shut, watched as the controlled chaos unfolded behind the glass, and she felt that old, familiar ache in her chest, the ache of being invisible. 20 minutes later, the young man was stabilized. Dr. Archer emerged from the trauma room, pulling off his gloves, his face grim but satisfied. "Good work. People," he said to the team. Then his eyes landed on Rebecca, who was standing quietly near the nurse's station. "Rebecca, we're going to need those linens changed in Trauma 1 when we're clear." "Thanks." Linens. That's what he thought she was good for. She nodded. "Of course, doctor." He walked away without another word. One of the younger nurses, a blonde woman named Stephanie, leaned over and whispered to another nurse, "I don't know how she does it. I'd lose my mind if I had to do the grunt work all the time." The other nurse shrugged. "Some people just aren't cut out for the tough stuff, I guess." Rebecca heard every word. She always did, but she didn't react. Didn't correct them. Didn't tell them that she had once held a soldier's insides together with her bare hands while mortars rained down around her. Didn't tell them that she had earned a Bronze Star for valor. Didn't tell them that the nightmares she still had were not from fear, but from memory. She just grabbed a fresh stack of linens and headed toward Trauma 1. It was almost 9 p.m. when the first gunshot echoed through the hospital. Rebecca was in the supply closet, restocking IV bags when she heard it. A sharp crack, muffled but unmistakable. Her entire body went rigid. She knew that sound. She had heard it 1,000 times. For a moment, the hospital disappeared. She was back in Kandahar. Dust in her lungs, blood on her hands, the staccato rhythm of automatic weapons fire in the distance. Then she heard the screaming, and she was back. Rebecca dropped the IV bags and moved. She didn't run. Running drew attention. She moved fast and low, her body remembering things her mind had tried to forget. She reached the hallway and pressed herself against the wall, listening. More screams, shouting, another gunshot. Then a voice. Male. Angry. Desperate. Where is he? Where's my brother? Rebecca's heart slowed. Her breathing steadied. She knew exactly what was happening. The young man they had brought in earlier, the gunshot victim. Someone had come for him. She moved toward the sound, her mind already calculating. How many shooters? What kind of weapon? What were the exits? She turned the corner and saw him, a man in his mid-20s, wild-eyed and shaking, holding a pistol. He had it aimed at Dr. Archer, who stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, hands raised. Behind the gunman, 2 nurses were huddled against the wall, sobbing. I said, where is he? The man screamed. Dr. Archer stammered. He's in surgery. You can't. Don't tell me what I can't do. The man's hand trembled. His finger hovered over the trigger. Rebecca stepped into the hallway. Hey. Her voice was calm, steady, quiet. The gunman's head snapped toward her. So did everyone else's. Dr. Archer's eyes went wide. Rebecca, get back, but she didn't move. She looked directly at the gunman. No fear, no hesitation. Put the gun down, she said softly. The man laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Who the hell are you? Another scared little nurse? Rebecca took 1 step forward. No, she said, and then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the hallway. Someone had hit the emergency shutoff, and probably hospital security finally responding, and the entire wing went black. Emergency backup lights flickered on a few seconds later, casting everything in a dim red glow. In that brief moment of confusion, Rebecca moved. She didn't think. Thinking took time. Time got people killed. She crossed the distance between herself and the gunman in 3 silent steps. Her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist and the one holding the pistol, and twisted it sharply upward. The angle was precise. Practiced. The same disarming technique she had drilled 1,000 times in combatives training. The gun fired. The bullet punched harmlessly into the ceiling tiles. Dust and debris rained down. The man cried out in pain and surprise, but Rebecca didn't let go. She used his own momentum against him, stepping inside his reach and driving her elbow into his solar plexus. The air rushed out of his lungs with a sick wheeze. He staggered backward. She stripped the pistol from his hand and stepped away, the weapon now held low and controlled at her side. The entire encounter took less than 4 seconds. The hallway was silent except for the sound of the gunman gasping for air on his knees. Dr. Archer stood frozen, his mouth hanging open. The 2 nurses were still pressed against the wall, eyes wide with shock. Rebecca didn't look at any of them. She kept her eyes on the man on the floor. Stay down, she said quietly. He didn't argue. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. 2 security guards came running, flashlights bouncing, radios crackling. They saw Rebecca standing there with the gun and immediately drew their own weapons. Drop it. Drop the weapon now. Rebecca didn't flinch. She calmly ejected the magazine from the pistol, racked the slide to clear the chamber, and set both pieces on the floor. Then she raised her hand, slow and deliberate. He's disarmed, she said evenly. No one's hurt. One of the guards, a stocky man named Ron who'd worked hospital security for 20 years, stared at her like she'd just sprouted wings. Nurse Hayes, he said, bewildered. She nodded. Ron blinked. Then he lowered his weapon and moved toward the man on the floor, pulling out zip tie restraints. The other guard radioed for police backup. Dr. Archer finally found his voice. Rebecca, what? How did you? She turned to face him. Her expression was calm, unreadable. I'll be in the break room if anyone needs me, she said, and then she walked away. The police arrived 10 minutes later. By then, the gunman, whose name turned out to be Dale Frost, was restrained and sitting in the hospital administrator's office under guard. His brother, the gunshot victim, was still in surgery, stable but critical. Dale had driven to the hospital in a panic after hearing his younger brother had been shot in what the police were calling a gang-related incident. He'd grabbed a pistol from his truck and stormed inside, demanding to see him. Desperation had turned to rage. Rage had turned to violence. It could have ended in a massacre, but it didn't, because of Rebecca Hayes, the quiet nurse. The fragile one, the one nobody thought could handle the tough stuff. She sat alone in the break room, hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at nothing. The door opened. Dr. Archer stepped inside. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last half hour. "Rebecca," he said carefully. She glanced up. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just looked at her, really looked at her. Maybe for the first time since she'd started working there. "That was," he began, then stopped. "I don't even know what that was." "You disarmed him like it was nothing, like you'd done it 100 times. Rebecca said nothing. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. She took a sip of her coffee. It was cold now, bitter. "I'm a nurse," she said. "No." Dr. Archer shook his head slowly. "You're something else. Something more." Rebecca set down her cup. She met his eyes. And for the first time in 2 years, she let him see a glimpse of the truth. "I was a combat medic," she said. "Army, 3 tours. Iraq and Afghanistan." Dr. Archer's face went pale. "I worked in forward operating bases, field hospitals. I treated gunshot wounds, shrapnel injuries, IED blast victims. I worked in places where the shooting didn't stop, where the blood didn't stop." Her voice was steady, flat. "So yes, doctor, I know how to handle the tough stuff." He stared at her, speechless. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" he finally asked. Rebecca looked away. "Because I didn't want to be that person anymore. I wanted to be normal, quiet, invisible." "Well," Dr. Archer said quietly, "you're not invisible anymore. By morning," the whole hospital knew, Rebecca Hayes, soft-spoken, fragile Rebecca, had taken down an armed gunman with her bare hands. The story spread like wildfire. Some people were in awe. Others were skeptical. A few were outright disbelieving. Stephanie, the blonde nurse who'd called her weak, cornered Rebecca in the supply room the next day. "Is it true?" she asked. "Were you really in the Army?" Rebecca didn't look up from the inventory sheet she was filling out. "Yes. Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Didn't seem relevant." Stephanie crossed her arms. I mean, you don't look like a soldier." Rebecca finally looked at her. "What does a soldier look like?" Stephanie opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't have an answer. Rebecca went back to her clipboard. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Stephanie left without another word. The real trouble started 2 days later. Rebecca was called into the hospital administrator's office. A woman named Linda Garrison sat behind the desk, mid-50s. Steel gray hair, the kind of person who ran everything by the book. "Sit down." "Rebecca," Linda said. Rebecca sat. Linda folded her hands on the desk. "I want to start by saying that what you did the other night was extraordinarily brave." "You may have saved lives," Rebecca nodded. "Thank you." "However," Linda continued, "there's been some concern raised." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "Concern? About your background, your military service?" Linda's tone was careful, clinical. "Some staff members have expressed discomfort. They're worried that someone with your level of combat experience might be unstable." The word hit Rebecca like a slap. "Unstable. I see," Rebecca said quietly. Linda sighed. "I'm not saying I agree, but hospital policy requires that we follow up on any concerns about employee mental health, especially after a violent incident." "I stopped a violent incident," Rebecca said, her voice hard now. "I know, and I'm grateful, but I'm going to have to ask you to undergo a psychological evaluation before you return to active duty. It's protocol." Rebecca stood up. "I've already been evaluated. Multiple times. By the VA, by Army psychologists. I've been cleared. This would be an independent evaluation. Through the hospital." Rebecca stared at her. "You're putting me on leave." Linda hesitated. "Administrative leave with pay. Just until we can clear this up." Rebecca's hands curled into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream, to argue, to tell Linda exactly what she thought of her protocol, but she didn't. She just nodded. "Fine," she said, and she walked out. That night, Rebecca sat alone in her small apartment on the edge of town. 1 bedroom. Barely any furniture. No pictures on the walls. Nothing personal. Nothing that could remind her of the past. She stared at the Bronze Star citation framed in a drawer she never opened for heroic achievement in connection with military operations against an armed enemy. Heroic, they'd called her a hero once, now they called her unstable. She closed the drawer. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Murphy's bar tomorrow. 6 p.m. Ron, the security guard. Rebecca frowned. She almost didn't respond, but something made her type back. Why? The reply came immediately. Because you're not the only one they're trying to bury. Rebecca stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed, I'll be there. Murphy's bar sat on the corner of Main and 5th, a squat brick building with neon beer signs in the windows and a gravel parking lot that never quite filled up. It was the kind of place where locals went to forget their problems, not solve them. Rebecca arrived at exactly 6 o'clock. She hadn't been inside Murphy since moving to Pine Ridge. She'd driven past it 100 times, seen the crowds on Friday nights, heard the music spilling out onto the street, but she'd never gone in. Crowds made her nervous. Loud noises made her jumpy. Alcohol made memories surface that she'd spent years trying to bury, but tonight was different. Tonight she needed answers. She pushed through the heavy wooden door. The smell hit her first. Stale beer, fried food, and cigarette smoke that had soaked into the walls over decades. A few heads turned as she entered. Small towns notice strangers, and even after 2 years, Rebecca still felt like a stranger. Ron was sitting in a corner booth away from the bar. He waved her over. She slid into the seat across from him. He looked different out of uniform. Older. Tired. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, and there was a half-empty beer in front of him. Thanks for coming, he said. Rebecca nodded. What's this about? Ron glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Then he leaned forward. You're getting railroaded, he said bluntly. Rebecca's expression didn't change. I figured. No, I mean really railroaded. This isn't just about protocol or policy. Someone wants you gone, Rebecca frowned. Who? Dr. Archer, she blinked. That didn't make sense. Archer, he seemed... I thought he was grateful. Ron shook his head. In public, yeah. He's been telling everyone you're a hero. But behind closed doors, he's the one who pushed Linda Garrison to put you on leave. He's the one who suggested the psych eval. Rebecca's hands tightened on the edge of the table. Why would he do that? Ron took a drink of his beer. Because you made him look bad. You did in 4 seconds what he couldn't do in 4 minutes of standing there frozen, and everyone saw it. The nurses, the patient's security, word's already spreading around town. People are calling you the hero nurse. They're saying you saved lives. I did save lives, Rebecca said quietly. I know, and that's the problem. Ron leaned back. Archer's ego can't handle it. He's been the big man at St. Mary's for 15 years. A hero doctor. The guy everyone looks up to. And then you come along. Quiet little Rebecca who nobody thought could handle the tough stuff. And you make him look like a coward. Rebecca shook her head. I didn't mean to... Doesn't matter what you meant. Matters what happened. Ron's voice was firm. And now he's doing damage control. He's planting seeds, telling the board that someone with your combat background might be a liability, that you could snap under pressure, that maybe you're dealing with PTSD and didn't disclose it. Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. That's a lie. I know it is, but it doesn't matter. Not in a small town. Not when the person spreading the lie is the head physician. Ron leaned forward again. Rebecca, they're building a case to fire you. And if you go through with that psych eval, they're going to twist whatever you say to make it fit their narrative. Rebecca stared at him. So what am I supposed to do? Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, fight back. Rebecca left Murphy's an hour later with her head spinning. Ron had laid it all out for her. The quiet meetings between Dr. Archer and the hospital administration. The whispers among the senior staff. The carefully worded emails suggesting that Rebecca might be unstable or traumatized or any number of other coded words that meant the same thing. Damaged. They were trying to erase her. And the worst part? It was working. She drove home in silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. For 2 years, she'd kept her head down. She'd been invisible. She'd done everything right, and it still wasn't enough. When she got back to her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall. Her phone buzzed. Another text, this time from a number she recognized. It was Stephanie, the blonde nurse. "Hey, I heard what they're doing to you. It's not right. If you need someone to back you up, I will." Rebecca stared at the message. Then another text came through. "From one of the ER techs, you saved our lives. We won't forget that." Then another, from a nurse she barely knew. "Don't let them push you out. We need people like you." One by one, the messages came, not from everyone, not even from most people, but enough to remind her that she wasn't alone. Rebecca sat there for a long time, reading and rereading the messages, and then she made a decision. She wasn't going to run. Not this time. The next morning, Rebecca walked into the hospital with her head held high. She didn't go to the nurse's station. Didn't check in with administration. She went straight to Dr. Archer's office. She knocked once. Didn't wait for an answer. Pushed the door open. Archer looked up from his desk, startled. "Rebecca, you're not supposed to be." "I know what you're doing," she said. He blinked. "Excuse me? I know you're trying to get me fired. I know you've been talking to Linda Garrison, planting doubts, suggesting I'm unstable." Archer's face went carefully neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Rebecca stepped into the office and closed the door behind her. "You're embarrassed, I get it. You froze when that gunman showed up and I didn't, and now you're trying to rewrite the story so you don't look weak." Archer stood up, his face flushing. "I was trying to keep the situation calm. Negotiation is the first step in any hostage scenario. There was no negotiation. You were terrified, and that's okay. Most people would be." Rebecca's voice was steady, cold. "But I'm not most people. I've been trained for situations like that, and instead of being grateful, you're punishing me for it." Archer's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then prove me wrong." Rebecca met his eyes. "Drop the psych eval. Tell Linda Garrison I'm fit for duty. Let me do my job." Archer stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a thin, condescending smile. "You really think you can just walk in here and make demands?" he said. "You're a nurse, Rebecca." "A nurse with a history of violence, a history of service," she interrupted, "who assaulted a man in the middle of my hospital. I disarmed a gunman, and now you're making wild accusations against a senior physician." Archer's voice rose. "Do you have any idea how this looks? Do you understand that you're only making things worse for yourself?" Rebecca didn't flinch. "I understand that you're scared of me." Archer's face went red. "Get out of my office." "Gladly." Rebecca turned toward the door. Then she stopped and looked back. But this isn't over. That afternoon, Rebecca did something she hadn't done in years. She made a phone call. The line rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hayes, didn't think I'd hear from you." "Again?" Rebecca closed her eyes. "Hi, Sergeant Major." Command Sergeant Major Angela Torres had been Rebecca's platoon leader in Afghanistan. Tough as nails. Fair as they came. The kind of leader who would run through fire for her soldiers, and expected them to do the same. They'd kept in touch for a while after Rebecca left the army. But eventually, the texts had stopped. The calls had faded. Rebecca had wanted to leave that life behind, but now she needed it. "What's going on, Hayes?" Torres asked. Her voice was still sharp, still commanding. Rebecca told her everything. The gunman, the disarming, the psych eval, Dr. Archer's campaign to push her out. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Then Torres said, "You still have your DD-214? "Yeah. And your medical clearance from the VA? "Yeah. Good, send me copies. I'm going to make some calls." Rebecca frowned. "Calls to who?" "People who owe me favors. People who don't like seeing veterans get screwed over." Torres's voice was hard. "You served your country with honor, Hayes. You earned a Bronze Star. And now some small-town doctor with a bruised ego thinks he can bury you? Not on my watch." Rebecca felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Hope. "Thank you, Sergeant Major," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. Just send me those files." "I will." Torres paused. Then her voice softened just slightly. "And Hayes? Yeah? Welcome back to the fight." 3 days later, everything changed. Rebecca was at home mid-morning when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something told her to pick up. "Is this Rebecca Hayes?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Jennifer Caldwell. I'm a reporter with the Billings Gazette. I'm working on a story about what happened at St. Mary's Hospital last week. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Rebecca's stomach dropped. "How did you get this number?" "A source forwarded me your contact information, along with some very interesting documents." Rebecca's pulse quickened. "What documents?" "Your military service record, your Bronze Star citation, and several internal hospital emails, suggesting that you're being placed on administrative leave not because of protocol, but because you made certain people uncomfortable." Sergeant Major Torres, she'd made her calls. Rebecca sat down slowly. "I don't know if I should be talking to you. I understand. But Ms. Hayes, this is a story that needs to be told. A decorated combat veteran saves lives in a hospital shooting, and instead of being celebrated, she's being pushed out. That's not just unfair. It's wrong." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, then she said, "What do you want to know?" The article hit the Billings Gazette website 2 days later. The headline read, "Hero Nurse or Liability? Decorated Veteran Faces Backlash After Disarming Hospital Gunman." It was thorough, fair, and devastating. Jennifer Caldwell had done her homework. She'd interviewed witnesses, pulled Rebecca's service record, obtained copies of the emails between Dr. Archer and Linda Garrison, emails that made it clear the psych eval wasn't about Rebecca's mental health. It was about protecting the hospital's image and Dr. Archer's reputation. The article quoted several nurses who praised Rebecca's actions. It included statements from Ron, the security guard, who described exactly how Rebecca had disarmed Dale Frost in a matter of seconds. And it quoted Dr. Archer, who declined to comment, but whose silence spoke volumes. By noon, the story had been picked up by the Associated Press. By evening, it was national news. Suddenly, everyone knew Rebecca Hayes' name. The phone calls started almost immediately. Local news stations wanted interviews. National outlets wanted her story. Veterans groups reached out offering support. Lawyers called offering to represent her pro bono if she wanted to file a lawsuit. Rebecca ignored most of them, but one call she couldn't ignore. It came from Linda Garrison, the hospital administrator. "Rebecca, we need to talk. In person. Can you come to the hospital tomorrow morning?" Rebecca's jaw tightened. "Am I still on administrative leave?" There was a pause. "That's what we need to discuss." Rebecca walked into Linda Garrison's office at 9 a.m. the next day. Linda wasn't alone. Sitting beside her was a man in a dark suit, hospital legal counsel. And across from them sat Dr. Ken Archer, looking pale and uncomfortable. Rebecca took the empty seat and waited. Linda cleared her throat. "Rebecca, I want to start by apologizing. The way this situation was handled was not ideal. Not ideal," Rebecca repeated flatly. The lawyer jumped in. "What Ms. Garrison means is that upon further review, the hospital recognizes that the administrative leave was premature. We also recognize that your actions during the incident with Mr. Frost were exemplary and likely prevented serious injuries or loss of life." Rebecca looked at Dr. Archer. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "We'd like to offer you reinstatement," Linda continued. "Full duties, no conditions. And we'd like to formally commend you for your bravery." Rebecca didn't react. "What about the psych eval?" Linda shifted uncomfortably. "No longer required. And Dr. Archer?" Rebecca's gaze locked on him. "Does he agree with this decision?" Archer's face flushed. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. The lawyer spoke before he could. "Dr. Archer has expressed his full support for your reinstatement." "I'd like to hear him say it," Rebecca said coldly. The room went silent. Archer finally looked at her. His expression was a mixture of resentment and defeat. "You're a valuable member of the team," he said stiffly. "We're glad to have you back." It was the most insincere thing Rebecca had ever heard, but it was enough. "I accept," she said. Rebecca returned to work the following Monday. The hospital felt different. Now people looked at her differently, spoke to her differently. Some were genuinely warm, thanking her, shaking her hand, telling her they were glad she was back. Others were cautious, uncomfortable, like they didn't quite know what to make of her anymore. And a few, including Dr. Archer's son, avoided her altogether. But Rebecca didn't care. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there to do her job, and that's exactly what she did. 2 weeks after her return, Rebecca was restocking supplies in the ER when Stephanie approached. "Hey," Stephanie said quietly. Rebecca looked up. "Hey, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For what I said before, about you not being cut out for the tough stuff." Stephanie's face was flushed. "I was wrong, and I should have known better." Rebecca studied her for a moment. Then she nodded. "We all make mistakes." Stephanie hesitated. "How do you do it? Stay so calm under pressure?" Rebecca set down the box she was holding. "You just do. Because people are counting on you, because freezing isn't an option, because someone has to act. But weren't you scared?" Rebecca thought about that. "Yeah, I was scared. But fear doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're human. What matters is what you do with it." Stephanie nodded slowly. "I want to be like that. Brave like you." Rebecca almost smiled. "You already are. You just don't know it yet." 3 months later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Rebecca was sitting in the break room when Ron stuck his head in. "You got a visitor," he said. Rebecca frowned. "Who?" "Army guy. Says he knows you." Rebecca's heart skipped. She walked out to the lobby and froze. Standing there in full dress uniform was Command Sergeant Major Angela Torres. She looked exactly the same. Steel gray hair in a tight bun, broad shoulders, a chest full of ribbons and medals, the kind of presence that commanded respect without saying a word. "Sergeant Major," Rebecca said, stunned. Torres grinned. "At ease, Hayes. I'm not here to inspect you." "What are you doing here?" Torres gestured to a quiet corner. They sat down. "I was in the area for a conference at Fort Harrison," Torres said. "Thought I'd swing by and see how you were doing. Check on my soldier." Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm not your soldier anymore." "Once my soldier, always my soldier." Torres's expression softened. "I read the article, saw the interviews. You handled yourself well. I just told the truth. That's more than most people do." Torres leaned back. "I'm proud of you, Hayes. You could have rolled over. Let them bury you. But you didn't. You stood your ground. That takes guts." Rebecca looked down. "I almost didn't. I almost walked away. But you didn't, and that's what matters." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Torres said, "You know, the Army could use people like you. Good medics are hard to find. If you ever wanted to come back—" "No," Rebecca said quietly. "I did my time. I'm done with that life." Torres nodded. "Fair enough. But for what it's worth, you're still a soldier, Hayes. You're just fighting a different kind of war now." Rebecca looked at her. "What kind of war is that?" Torres smiled. "The kind where you prove that strength doesn't look like what people expect. Where you show that courage comes in all shapes and sizes. Where you remind people that the quietest person in the room might just be the strongest." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. "Thank you, Sergeant Major," she whispered. Torres stood and extended her hand. Rebecca shook it. "Stay strong, Hayes, and remember, you're never alone. You've got an army of people who have your back. You just have to let them in." That night, Rebecca sat in her apartment. For the first time in 2 years, she opened the drawer where she kept her Bronze Star. She looked at the citation. Read the words she'd read 100 times before. For heroic achievement in connection with military operations against an armed enemy. She used to think those words belonged to someone else. Someone she used to be, but now she understood. They belonged to her, not just the soldier she was, but the woman she'd become. Rebecca Hayes wasn't fragile, wasn't invisible, wasn't broken. She was a survivor, a fighter, a hero, and she always had been. She just needed to remember. 6 months later, Rebecca was promoted to head nurse of the ER. Dr. Archer left St. Mary's 3 months after that, quietly, without fanfare, taking a position at a hospital 2 states away. And Rebecca? She stayed. She stayed in Pine Ridge, in the small hospital where no one had believed she was strong enough. And every single day, she proved them wrong, not with words, but with action. Because that's what soldiers do. They show up. They do the work. They save lives, no matter who's watching. No matter who believes in them, they just do it. And Rebecca Hayes? She was a soldier through and through.